get started now with the two speakers that I think most people here are very familiar with. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mike Walden and Dr. Nick Piggott. Both of these men don't need much introduction in the ag community, but maybe some of you that have never been here before, maybe you need a little introduction to them. Mike Walden is a William Niels Rooms Distinguished Professor of Economics at NC State University. He has teaching, research, and extension responsibilities in the area of consumer economics, economic outlook, and public policy. He's published 8 books and over 250 articles and reports. Dr. Walden directs the semi-annual economic forecast, the North Carolina Economic Outlook. He's won numerous academic and public awards, including the UNC Board of Governors Award of Excellence in Public Service and the Order of the Long Leaf Pine. He is somebody that I depend on and believe in for his economic forecast, and in bad times he will tell you the truth, but he'll also tell you the truth in good times, so that's what we need to hear. Dr. Piggott serves as Associate Department Head and Extension Leader for the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. He joined NC State University's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences in 1999, and his areas of expertise are commodity markets, risk management, demand analysis, and applied econometrics. Dr. Piggott currently splits his time between research and extension. He's testified before Congress on the state of the farm economy and the impact of federal policy on agriculture. He's written numerous articles for scholarly journals and has been an invited speaker on agricultural economics at conferences all over the United States and around the world. Both of these gentlemen have been here before, and I think you will enjoy what they've got to say. And if you want to sugarcoat it just a little bit after what we went through in 18, it will be fine, but we need to know the truth, so I thank both of you for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. I want to start by saying that anyone who knows me, especially my wife, when asked, what's Mike's favorite day of the year? She will tell you, it's not my birthday, it's not Christmas, it's maybe not my anniversary either. It's when the state fair opens. I love the state fair, live for the state fair. I have, Nick can attest to this, I have in my office, I'm running out of space, I have every hat from the state fair, I think back 20 or 25 years. I don't come from a farm. I did not grow up on a farm, but both my grandfathers in Ohio were farmers. One raised hogs. Cincinnati's in its day was known as Porkopolis. Cincinnati and the environs around was a big hog producing area. My other grandfather raised cattle. My late father used to tell me, he grew up on the farm that raised hogs, used to tell me that he ate so much pork when he was growing up that the only pork he would eat later in life was bacon. Shied away from all the other. Before I get into my presentation, I do want to pat you all on the back, your collective backs. I generate the numbers that I think you know the Commissioner proudly uses, that when you look at agriculture broadly in North Carolina and you include not only what farmers do, but the processors do, wholesalers, retailers, I like to call that agribusiness. It's an $87 billion industry in the state, and we're working to get that even higher. You might say, well, and for example, the entire state economy is $510 billion. So you can do the math on that 87 billion as a percent of the entire state economy. And you might say, well, why don't more people understand how important farming is and how important agriculture is? In fact, I think you can very much make a case, if you read history, that if it wasn't for what you do in terms of providing, obviously, food, but providing food at an economically good rate, and indeed, food prices, when you adjust for inflation, have gone down, and people's budgets, used to be most of people's budgets would be spent on food, now it's a fraction of that. but it's because you are so productive. You are so productive. And of course, if you look at world numbers, you are seeing poverty in the world going down, not just in our country, but poverty in the world going down. And I think that's largely because, or a big part of that is because of what you do in providing ample supplies of food at very reasonable prices that people can afford to eat. They don't have to spend the majority of their money on food, and they can afford to do other things, get educated, open businesses, etc. So that's just my public thanks to you for what you do, and I like to remind people of that. Well, my job this morning is to look at the big picture. Nick's going to get down into individual markets of the commodities that provide your livelihood. But I want to look at the big picture because the big picture does affect you. It affects everyone. You obviously are aware of what's going on with trade. You're hearing noises about recession. You probably have read headlines about what the Federal Reserve is doing. So I want to try to put all that in perspective and inform you, at least as we stand now, what indeed is going on. The title of my talk is whether we are in the late innings of this economic expansion, and obviously that refers to the concerns about maybe an impending recession. Well, first of all, a quick look back at 2018. 2018, again, looking at the entire economy, not yours per se, but the entire economy. 2018 was actually a very good year. We don't have the final numbers in, but it looks like we're going to grow at a rate of about 3.2%, which is very good. You don't necessarily have context that. That's very good. 2.6 million net new jobs added at the national level. Jobless rate has gotten under 4%. And that final metric, investment rate, refers to how much the percent of revenues that businesses are plowing back into their businesses to buy new technology, new machinery, and make the economy productive. That was just shy of 20%. That's a very, very good number. So 2018 was a very good year. But now whoops, let me just go back, yeah. Now you're hearing worries that, well, maybe we're going to take a pause, or maybe we're going to step back. And indeed, one of the reasons why economists and others are worrying about that is if we get to June of this year, and the economy has still grown in the first 6 months of this year, it will be the longest period of sustained economic growth in our country, in our history. 10 years. We will never have gone that long without a recession. So some people are worried about a recession coming simply because they think it's time. There are really, in my mind, three views right now on a recession. One is that we're not going to have a recession because we already had one in 2015. Now you might be saying, what do you mean, Walden? Well, to have an official recession declared, you have to have the economy retreat for 2 consecutive quarters, 6 months. In 2015, we actually had a major retreat for a quarter. Didn't meet 2 quarters, so therefore it's not been an official recession. But some economists point to that and say, well, you know, these arbitrary rules about 2 quarters, they're just arbitrary. We had our recession in 2015, so, and one of these economists who pushed this is a Nobel Prize winner, I should say. So that's one view. Another view is that the tax cuts, the tax package that was passed in late 2017, to use the term of the President's chief economic advisor, a guy named Kevin Hassett, turbocharged the economy. I like that word, turbocharged. He argues that, hey, the rules that we were living by are out the window because we have a new economy based on lower tax rates, especially for businesses, based on the ability of businesses to invest and deduct that investment all in one fell swoop. So the President's chief economist is seeing continued economic growth. And then the last viewpoint is probably the most pessimistic one. And this is that, well, yeah, all those first 2 viewpoints, we take that into account, but if we look around the world right now, things do seem to be slowing down. Consumer confidence is waning a little bit. We've obviously had volatility in the stock market. So this view is that, no, maybe we won't have a recession this year, 2019, but 2020 looks to be. So I'm not going to pick one of these views for you. My job is to give you information, but that seems to be where we are in terms of recession. Now, Recessions just don't happen, they're going to be triggered by something. And I've got a list here of possible triggers. I'm going to dismiss the first three fairly quickly. Household debt. We worry about households overextending themselves. In fact, that was really the main cause of what we call the Great Recession from 2007 to 2009. If you look at household debt now, in terms of how much people have to budget out of their disposable income to meet debt payments, mortgage, car loan, etc., it's at an historic low. So households, yes, households are taking on more debt, but their incomes are going up because more people are working, wages are rising a little bit, and interest rates still are very, very low. So I don't see household debt as an issue. I'm just going to say ditto on business debt. Same thing with businesses. Businesses have taken on more debt, but the revenues have gone up. They are still enjoying borrowing at low rates. So I don't think that's an issue also. And then energy prices, those of you who are as old as I am, remember that in the 70s, we had two major recessions in our country, both of which were sparked by high energy prices. OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, in two times in the 70s, put the screws to us for geopolitical reasons, raised, contracted oil supplies, oil prices went up, gas prices went up, and really triggered two recessions. Right now, oil prices on trend have been falling. They'll probably go up a little bit in the future, but have been falling. But the big change between then and now is then in the 70s, the United States was not a major energy producer of oil. We were pretty much at the mercy of the rest of the world to acquire oil. Now we are a major energy producer. In fact, in some months, we are the biggest oil producer in the world. We're now a net exporter of oil. So we, in some sense, control our fate there on energy, and even if oil prices and gas prices went up, in the old days when that happened, and you and I were paying more for gas at the pump, that money would flow out of the country. It would go to the Middle East. It would go to Russia. Now, a large part of that, if indeed this happens and oil prices go up, comes back and stays in the country. So although you and I won't like it, at least that money, the extra money we're paying, stay. Now the others, I'm going to spend a little bit of time because I do think these other factors that could trigger a recession are worthy of your attention. One is the Federal Reserve. I love teaching the Federal Reserve to students because the way I introduce that is I say, now students, what if when you write a check, now first of all when I say that I get a lot of blank stares because a lot of young people don't write checks anymore. So I have to explain what a check is. But what if when you write a check, you don't have to debit anything? And of course, that would be great. And I say, is there any institution in the country that can do that? And the answer is yes, it's the Federal Reserve. That often gets their attention and that sets the stage for my discussion. Federal Reserve has a lot of functions. One of the functions is to try to keep the economy growing on an even keel, not with a lot of ups and downs, but on an even keel, but also try to keep that economy growing without high inflation. And one of the tools they use to achieve that is to move interest rates that they control. They don't control all rates, but they control a couple key rates that influence all the other rates. Move those interest rates up and down. So for example, during the Great Recession, when clearly we weren't growing, we were retreating, and the Federal Reserve wanted to stimulate growth, what did they do? They lowered interest rates dramatically. In fact, the key rate that they controlled went to 0. Actually stayed there for 6 years. On the other hand, when they feel that the economy is growing and maybe growing a tad fast, such that inflation could bubble up, they raise rates. They've been in the latter situation recently. In fact, since 2015, they have been gradually raising interest rates in order to position themselves and position the economy in a way that it could still grow, but that we didn't have big bursts of inflation. Now that is not a science. Those are educated guesses as to how much the Federal Reserve should raise rates. And this past year, 2018, they got a lot of pushback. President pushed back, a lot of investors pushed back, a lot of economists pushed back and said, Federal Reserve, you may be setting us up, you may be causing a recession. You may be raising rates so much and making the cost of borrowing so high that businesses are going to stop borrowing, stop spending, and we're going to have a recession. And what I think really got the Federal Reserve's attention was the big drop in the stock market in December, which you never know what causes stock markets to go up and down, but a lot of analysts said it was the Federal Reserve's policy, stated policy, that not only had they raised interest rates, they were going to continue to do that. So just yesterday, the Federal Reserve had their first meeting of 2019. They meet 6 times each year, and they did not raise interest rates. And furthermore, in their statement, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, in his statement said, we're not necessarily going to raise interest rates anymore in the future. We're going to look at what the economy is doing, and we're not in a fixed pattern here. So my view is I think the Federal Reserve blinked. And I think the Federal Reserve became concerned that maybe they were overdoing it on the interest rate policy. But this is clearly something you need to watch, something you need to watch. The danger here is if inflation does become a problem, and the Federal Reserve has delayed raising rates, then dealing with that higher inflation is going to mean tougher policies, sort of akin to what happened in the late 70s when the Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker had to raise rates to double-digit levels in order to cool off inflation. So definitely, though, watch the Federal Reserve, but right now it looks like the Federal Reserve is waiting and watching, and they're not necessarily going to raise rates more. Trade wars, obviously something you are very, very interested in. Nick's going to tell you exactly how those trade wars are going to pan out. No, I'm teasing. Real quickly, the Trump administration, when it came in, said we're not happy with a lot of our trade pacts that we've made. We're not happy with NAFTA. We're not happy with the EU. We're certainly not happy with China. So, rightly or wrongly, I'll let you decide, the Trump administration said we're going to try to fix this by renegotiating, and if renegotiating doesn't work, we're going to get tough and try to make it harder for those countries to continue to trade with us by raising tariffs. So the administration was successful in getting a new NAFTA, I'm sure you're aware of this, agreed to by Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. It's now called the U.S.-Mexican-Canadian Agreement. They got to put some vowels in there to make it a word you can say. Now, before you think that's done, it's not done. Here's something you need to watch. Our Congress, as well as the General Assembly and the legislature and the General Assembly in Mexico and the Parliament in Canada, they have to vote on approving this. And in our Congress, it has to be both houses. And that is not a done deal. It's far from conclusive that that will happen. And to further complicate things, we don't know if our Congress or the Parliament or General Assembly of Mexico, Canada, but if our Congress in particular both houses does not approve this, do we go back to the old NAFTA or do we go back to no NAFTA? We don't know that. The President has made comments about he's going to go back to no NAFTA, and that could dramatically affect you. So this is something for you definitely to watch. Now, China. China's the big issue we have right now. We have 3 problems with China, and I should say these problems go back decades. Number 1, we don't think China opens their markets to our people, to our producers, as much as we open to them. There's some evidence of that. Number 2, we don't like the fact that if you are competing for Chinese customers in China, in many cases you have to compete not just against Chinese companies that are like you, but you have to compete against Chinese companies that are state-run. And that gives them a lot of advantages. So we don't like that. And number 3, we don't like the fact that if one of our companies, say an agribusiness company, wants to set up operations in China, China says, fine, you can do that, but here's a condition. You have to take on one of our state-run companies as a partner. And that partner, therefore, has access to all of your internal information. We don't like that. Now, we have not liked these 3 things. This goes back at least 2 administrations, the Obama administration, the George W. Bush administration. Both those administrations have pursued the diplomatic angle and gone to the World Trade Organization and complained with no headway. The Trump administration, I think, wrongly or rightly, I'll let you decide, has said, okay, if we don't get their attention just complaining, we're going to get their attention with money. And so we have imposed tariffs on about half of what China sells to us, higher tariffs I should say. And China's retaliating by doing the same thing to us. And so literally you could call that a trade war. Now, January 1st of this year, if there had been no agreement between the US and China, we were supposed to, or what was supposed to happen was we were going to apply higher tariffs to the rest, the other 50% of what China sells to us, and clearly they would have done the same. At the Buenos Aires G20 meeting, President Xi and President Trump agreed to delay that. And they've given their negotiators until the end of March to come to an agreement. And furthermore, the president called in what I think is his big gun, a guy named Robert Lighthizer, who has decades of experience in negotiating trade agreements. He did the new NAFTA. So it's a day-to-day thing. Some days you'll read press reports that things are going well, we're going to have an agreement. Another day you'll say, no, it's not. I don't know. My personal opinion, personal only, is that we're going to get an agreement. I think China seems to be noticing that they're suffering, which gets me to my next factor that could cause a recession, and that is a foreign shock, particularly China. If you look at China's economy, some say they're actually in a recession. There are various indicators, production, the value of their currency, their stock market, all down. Most analysts attribute this to the trade war. Trade is much more important to China than it is to us. So many people think this is going to be enough to get China to agree to some concessions. So we will see, but we've got obviously a short time period here. If this doesn't work out, if the trade agreement doesn't work out, and either China's economy gets worse, or simply we can't sell our products to China, that's going to shave some growth off our economy. Maybe not enough to cause an outright recession, but we'll notice it. We will notice the economy growing much more slowly. So watch the Federal Reserve, watch the trade negotiations, and watch what's happening in the Chinese economy. Now the stock market. Someone came by the table when I was sitting here and greeted me and said, Dr. Walden, what's your advice on the stock market? Buy low, sell high? Well, of course, always. Kidding aside, stock market has done very, very well since the dark days of the last recession. The Dow Jones was 6,500 at its low point during the 2007-2009 recession. It's up yesterday, was it close to 25,000, a little over 25,000, with a 400-point gain that actually came because of the comments from the Federal Reserve. So we've had a big run, and some say, hey, it's just time for a pause. I think one of the things that we saw in December was I'm not unique in this, most analysts, most economists would argue to you that there are two forces behind movements in the stock market. One is fundamentals. People who are investing in stocks try to look at the economy, look at the business. If you're looking at a particular stock, look at what that business is doing. You look at fundamentals, you look at numbers, you look at projections, etc. On the other hand, emotion can take over, and I think that was a lot of what was behind the decline in the stock market in December. So the fundamentals can be good, but if people get scared, the market can still go down. So I don't know how much that's worth to you, but that is something to notice. All right, there are a whole other host of issues in the country that we could talk about that we don't have time for. Aging population, productivity, invisible unemployment. We've probably got about 6 million people out there working age who are able to work, who aren't working. We're seeing little of that whittled away. Urban-rural divide, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the last thing, the impact of technology on employment. But right now, as I'm standing here at 10 o'clock on January 31st, 2019, my forecast may change this afternoon. I do think the economy is going to continue to grow this year. Slower rate, though. Give you a comparison there. A lot of people ask me, well, Walden, how much lower can the unemployment rate go? Well, in the last, 40 years, I forget how far I went back, the lowest unemployment rate we had in the country is 2.8%. So we could go lower. I don't think we're going to go to 2.8, but I think we could go lower. And again, watch the Federal Reserve and watch inflation. Right now, inflation is very good. Inflation is not showing any signs of bubbling up, which I think is another reason why the Fed yesterday said they're going to pause. All right, let me conclude by talking a little bit about North Carolina. We had a good year in North Carolina in 2018. I mean, obviously I'm aware of Florence, and many of you were hurt by that, many of your local economies. I get that, I'm not ignoring that, but I'm looking overall for the state economy. We added 100,000 net new jobs, which was a very, very good number. It's about 20,000, 20,000 higher than we'd averaged previous years. The unemployment rate in our state went down. Our growth rate measured by GDP, gross domestic product, has lagged, but we only have data for the first half of the year, so I'm not putting a lot of emphasis on that. You hear about these two big issues in the state. One is the fact that if you look at where jobs have been created in the 21st century, they have been high-paying jobs, which is good, low-paying jobs, but not many middle-paying jobs. We actually saw an improvement in that in 2018. We had as fast a growth in middle-paying jobs in 2018 as we had for lower-paying jobs. Manufacturing jobs have come back, some transportation jobs, some tech jobs in healthcare, so that's good. And then the urban-rural divide, which gets a lot of focus, and that's simply the point that, again, if you look in the 21st century, the really fast-growing economies have been in our big metro areas. Many rural counties have had slow growth. We had good news on that in 2018. If you look at job growth rates, not number of jobs, but job growth rates, rural counties actually had the fastest job growth rates, faster than metro counties in 2018. And I attribute that to the fact that our economy has been very robust for several years. Businesses are now looking at opportunities at a wider scale, geographic scale in the state. So we actually had very good news on these two divides. And then lastly, I put out something called a index of leading indicators for the state. In fact, I just put out my January report yesterday. This is a number that tries to give you some sense of where the economy is going. That is to say, if it's level or if it's moving up, it means the economic growth rate of the state is going to continue or go higher. If it's going down, the growth rate is going to slow. And you can see we've had a pretty good track record in the last several years. Now, what you're obviously seeing is that big drop at the end of last year. That's Florence. So I'm not real worried about that. If you look inside this index, you see most of that drop was due to the fact that Florence created a lot of dislocation. We saw that in the initial claims for unemployment, which tripled in October and November, and that was enough to send that index down. That's going to be temporary. You can see a rebound, slight rebound already. So I don't think Florence is crippling in terms of the long-run prosperity of the state economy. So let me stop there and turn it over to Nick. But again, let me take this opportunity to thank you for what you do, not just individually, but collectively as a major, major part of our state economy and the prosperity that you allow to develop in our state, in our nation, and world. Thank you very much.